All right, we'll call to order this meeting of the WIFA Water Supply Development Committee. I saw that, or I heard that the recording had been started. Is that correct? All right, Ms. Mendoza, can you call the roll?
Yes. Ted Cook. Here. Buchanan Davis.
Here.
Patrice Horseman.
Here.
Pete Kim.
Here.
Jonathan Lines.
Present virtually.
Thank you. Richard Blunt.
Present.
And Sue Montgomery. Quorum is confirmed.
Great, thank you. As we get started, for the record, please remember to identify yourself when making a motion or requesting to speak. For those attending virtually, please ensure you are unmuted for any votes. And in addition, if any member wishes to depart the meeting, please announce your departure for our recorded meeting records. We'll go to agenda item 2, any conflicts of interest disclosures.
Joe Satelli, General Counsel. No disclosures have been submitted for today's meeting. Thank you.
Great. Then we'll move on to the next agenda item, the director's report. I'll pass it over to Chuck for lead us in a discussion.
Thanks, Buchanan. Lindsay's gonna talk a little bit next about what we have in terms of in the queue on the project party list. I think it's fair to say that we've seen pretty robust demand come in for the program. It was our intention to take all the applications we had at any one time and bring them to you. We didn't get through 40 applications. We didn't think that you guys would have the appetite to sit through 40 applications right now. So what we have is 11 that we're ready in front of you. We do intend to continue or continue to process the applications. We'll expect Yolanda to work with you or Brenda, and we may things that you recommend out of this committee meeting, we plan on bringing to the board in December. The rest, or we continue to work through that PPL, we may set up a supplemental meeting in January to continue to process a lot of the applications that we brought in front of you. So for the applicants who have applied, thank you for all that interest, and we will continue to work to get all those in front of the committee. That's all I have. I think we'll get updates on the program side as well as the finance side before you get into projects.
Great. Any questions for Director Podolak? I know that there's been a lot of hard work, and as we've stood up this program and this loan, and we'll reiterate that multiple times at the outset of the meeting. Want to make sure that we recognize staff for all the hard work that's being done, and as we figure this out, and it's exciting time. So we will move on to agenda item 4 and get an update on the program status from Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide here. So as Director Podolak mentioned, we did really have a robust submission of the project priority list application. So right now on your PPL, we have 48 applications for just over $93 million. Those applications are really coming in from all over the state, minus where we have our initial AMAs, because those are not eligible locations, but otherwise really widespread throughout the state. And we're really excited to see all of these applications coming in. We definitely, right now we have Yavapai County and Cochise County kind of leading the way for the most applied for so far, but we're seeing applications in just about every county where we have eligible entities. We go on to the next slide. So I'm not going to show the entire project priority list on the screen right now because largely it's just too large to put up on the screen. But I do encourage the committee to look over that list, see what's going to be coming up soon for you. If there's any questions on any of those pending applications, please let us know. But in general, this is kind of how these applications are breaking down based on some big types of projects that we're seeing. So we have a large number of conveyance type projects, which are from drinking water systems. These are including projects like water lines, wells, storage tanks. A small number of those conveyance projects are for the agricultural system. So we kind of called those out in the green box on the top there. We also have a number of applications from wastewater systems where they are looking to do upgrades that can provide additional opportunities for reuse and recharge. And then we have a small amount of requested for conservation focused projects. So we have one turf removal project and then several stormwater projects. We don't have any other applications for the recovery of stored water or water rights. And those would be the other kind of statutory eligible type projects that we could be funding through this program. And with that, as I said, I would really encourage the committee to do a full review, that we have the entire list in your committee materials. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer those. But for today's agenda, we will have 11 of the 48 applications for your consideration. And then, as Director Podolak mentioned, we are looking at possibly a supplemental meeting to get through another batch of them. So,
Great.
any questions for me?
Any questions for Lindsay? I just want to say before we get questions is this is helpful for me to kind of see the types of projects, and one of the struggles staff and this committee's kind of try to balance and try to understand is kind of how it differentiates between some of our other funds, our drinking water, clean water funds. And what are some of the projects that we can fund here that maybe we can't fund elsewhere? And I think some of that is, you know, the stormwater and recharge and some of that. And anyways, as we kind of work through that, but this is helpful to kind of see where, obviously a lot of conveyance type projects, but it's good to see that we're starting to see different types of water supply projects. So it's helpful. Questions for Lindsay? All right, thank you for that. We'll move to agenda item 5. Denise will go over the financial status of the fund.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this next slide is, I just wanted to give the committee a snapshot on where we're at currently. So what this is showing you is at the beginning of the year, we had 152 million. Through November, we've had interest earnings of about 1.7 million. So that brings our total up to almost $54 million for that fund. We have had board applications approved through November that amount to $4 million. And then we've had a little bit of admin costs. So the balance as of the beginning of November is 149,755,000. So that's the current amount in the fund balance. So if we go to the next slide, what I wanted to do was give the committee some awareness on where they're at in terms of loans versus grants. So as you know, this fund can either be used for loans or providing grants. So what we did on this side is we said, okay, if we have the 150 million and we apply a target, 60% of that money is for loans, 40% is for grants. We would have 90 million for the loan category, 60 for the grant category. Then what we did was we took Lindsay's PPL that she just presented, which is about $93 million. We've done a very cursory first review of those applications, and we're estimating that there's about $33 million that could be loans. Now, again, that number may change as Lindsay completes her final analysis of those applications, but that's our estimate at this point. And we also have about 60 million that's related to grants. So if you take our targets less that PPL, we're showing you a difference. So that would mean that we would still have 57 million in loans and 0% in grants if we wanted to hit those targets from above. That's all that slide's showing you. So then,
I want free money.
Yeah.
so then if we go to the next slide, what I wanted to do in these next 3 slides is I wanted to forecast this. So I wanted to see how this fund would actually be executed over time for the whole 153 million that's in that fund. So let me just take a minute to walk you through this. So the gray bars is basically pending applications. So you can see those gray bars are going to go down over time. The line is how much money we have, right? So we're starting off with $153 million and we're going to bringing it down to 0. I'm anticipating February of 2026. The blue is how much we have in grants, and the green is how much we have for loans. And in this particular chart, I'm forecasting it based on the trajectory that we're on now, right? So looking at the PPL and then applying those rates to the remaining amount for the full 153 million, this is where I anticipate we could end up. So that would be $103 million in grants and about 50 million in loans. So that's where we're at today. Now this next chart, what I did was I said, okay, what if we still wanted to hit that 60-40 target. Basically, what we would do is anything in the future beyond this PPL would have to be loans. And that's how we would hit the 60%, 40% target. And again, if we had $90 million of loans, that means we would have a revolving fund, which would be about $13 million of money that we could turn over to loans again. And then the next chart, what I attempted to do was, okay, let's just show you what it would look like if we kept the 60-40 split from the get-go. So this shows you kind of the world where this would be a revolving fund. So these are just graphs to show you where we're at and where this fund is at and how you want to manage it going into the future. But I do want to, at the next slide, bring you back to what we have in the strategic plan. Because overall, we got to have a larger picture of where we're at, right? So in the strategic plan, we have a financial plan that supports it, where we have $540 million that includes both SRF loans and water supply development revolving fund loans. And we want to not over leverage those funds. We want to maintain that AAA rating. And one thing I want to point out is all of the applications that you're going to be looking at today go towards the goal of the 100 priority communities, because these are all priority communities that are coming from the Water Supply Development Fund project fund. So overall, I think our whole program is supporting the strategic plan at this point. We just have a little bit of caution on whether this fund will be sustainable or not. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
We're also happy to take feedback that that bar chart of forecasting should be sort of familiar. We tried to do a similar kind of thing as we got into the second half of the Water Conservation Grant Fund to sort of let the committee and the board know where we're going. It's not a, PS with the red, green, yellow stoplight thing. It's definitely not a stoplight, but it is we'll continue to update that forecast so the committee and board can see where we're heading and what that means in terms of sustainability. So if that's helpful, if that could be provided in any way, we'll have to take feedback and update those reports.
It's not an easy thing, so I commend you on this and trying to find that balance. I mean, there's a reason why the legislature told us that they wanted part of this fund to be grants. And so we should include that. We need to, there's not one extreme to the other. We're trying to find that balance and figure it out, knowing that if you even have a 40% of it being the grants, then it's only sustainable so far. And so I appreciate this explanation highlighting sort of that tension that we're feeling and trying to find the right balance on that. And I also think that some of us have been excited to get the program up and running, and that's important. It be part of the vernacular in the rural Arizona to know that there's this fund out there, and so to get that money to work sooner, knowing that as we go on, that might have to continue to change and we adapt and make it more sustainable in the long term or whatever. Are there questions for staff? Ted?
I don't know if this is a question or a comment. Oh, yeah. This may be a comment more than a question, but Denise, would you mind backing it up to the 3 bar charts that you had a moment ago? Okay, so this is
The first one.
there you go. So on one end, you've modeled here what it would look like if the balance of our experience is identical to these 48 applications that we've received so far as the mix between grants and loans. And this is, I want to make it clear that the applications that we've received have been processed and the recommendations have been brought forward to this committee based on the rules that we have right now, the policy and the procedures that we have right now. This is not applicants coming in saying, I only want a grant. This is the applicants submit their application and they get sorted into the grant loan mix that's appropriate as defined right now. So this is on one end. If you go to graph number 3 for just a second, this models then, if I understand it correctly, of what if somehow WIFA figures out how to maintain the 40% grant, 60% loan split from the beginning of the project. It is the eventual outcome is not going to be one of those two extremes. It's not going to be quite as bad, I don't think, as if we look at sustainability, quite as bad as the first graph, and it probably won't look as good as this because frankly, we've passed the point of being able to reproduce this even if we wanted to. So kind of in the middle, one in the middle is the second graph. If you could go back to that one, that we force it by the end to reflect 40% grant and 60% loan. And it's so the outcome at the very end is similar to the third graph, but the way that we get there is by having to change something from the way that it is right now so that we don't end up like graph one, if that's somewhere where we don't want to end up. I think it's pretty clear to all of us that if you remember the numbers on graph number one, it's at least clear to me, I'll just speak for myself. $49 million on graph number one that's remaining as loans once the 153 million is all gone is not enough to sustain this program. It's not a revolving fund, it's more like a corkscrew or a death spiral. So my point of dragging everyone through all of this is that I think we have a pretty near-term decision point to make by this committee and by the board, whether or not we're going to change any of the rules from the way the program is currently set up beyond these 48 applications that we've received already, because otherwise, the further along in time that we go, the harder it's going to be, and at some point it will become impossible to achieve this type of outcome if that's what we think is the maybe not the minimum, but probably have a shooting chance at maintaining a revolving fund rather than a rapidly declining fund where there's no funding left for any future applicants. And to me, interperiod equity is important. We have these trade-offs between put the money to work, protect it from being swept, versus use it all up right now and then there's nothing for the next person that comes.
I think that's well said and kind of explain that very well and put that in context. And I think in my comments, I was recognizing that same thing, but saying I'm okay with what we've done so far because it's getting the program off its feet and getting that money to work and getting it part of the vernacular of rural Arizona, where they're aware of that program. But you're right. I think that's a interesting, good point. Kim, Pete.
Tough decision, right? End of the day, where I kind of am just netting out on this, and it deserves more discussion and thought. You can only give the money away once. You can loan it a lot of times, right? And so we've been entrusted with funds to do the best in our judgment for the state. And you got to weigh that. If you give the money all away once, then that's it. Maybe it's something but every loan that we create not only creates a certain amount of benefit, but then you can pile on the additional benefits when you reloan it. And that's the rub, right? And I wish I had a crystal ball to understand what the future looks like. But in the absence of perfect information about the future, I think you have to err on the side of prudence, right? We might need that even more than we do today. We might not, I don't know. But putting ourselves on a path where we've got de minimis later doesn't feel to be like a course of action that feels long-term prudent and cautious to me. So I appreciated the exact way that Mr. Cook described it. I see it that way as well. And then I'm just trying to, in my mind, to come to a place where we can be compassionate in the short term, but also wise in the future. And that tension, as it was called, is specifically, I think, probably the most important decision that we'll make in terms of the votes that we take on this council.
And Pete, if I could build on that, we don't have perfect information, but included in the supplemental board book, we have a full due diligence on every applicant. That is, Scott and the loan team has done the same due diligence on applicants who are receiving loans and grants versus, and as well as just grants. And so you do get we've done full fiscal or financial due diligence, looked at applicants' ability to potentially take on new debt. And so you can find what the interest rate would be if it wasn't full grants. And you can also look at what our assessment of their debt service coverage and some of the metrics about their ability to take on. And even on some of the applicants that we're recommending you give 100% grant to, based off of the procedures that are in place right now, we do think there is some capacity on some of those entities to take on debt. So if you did go down a path where you were saving some of the money for borrowers in the future, you may still be able to help many of these exact same types of borrowers or applicants, even with a little bit of debt in there mixed in with the grants.
Yep. I mean, I don't think it shocks anybody that the people who are applying would prefer free money. Right? I would. So, but that's not the point, right? The point is that there's not enough free money for everybody. I wish there was. And so how do we spread out the burden in a reasonable and compassionate way such that we can help lots of other folks too?
And I think that as applicants, and we'll get through our regular agenda today, free money is always better, but as potential applicants will see, the loans are a pretty darn good deal. And so it's also appealing. So we'd hope you take a close look at them. Those who have and those who haven't already, take a look at it because it's still pretty good financially.
I actually think that that's reasonable to review, right? Just how good a deal those loans are compared to like what the other things are. Denise, would you mind just like kind of giving us a market scope on, hey, you know what? Like it might not be free money, but it's still much, much cheaper than the alternatives. And if we could just understand what that would be, I think it would help.
Sure. So on the SRF programs, we base a loan rate on a AAA rating. And right now, if you look at the market, it's sitting at 3.5% for a AAA rating. So now if we look at the borrowers in this pool, it's very, I don't know if they would be able to get to the market with a AAA rating to issue debt.
Let's just assume that they won't.
I'm gonna be kind. So just that rate in itself and using that rate as a basis is already a benefit to a lot of these borrowers. But what we have done, if you remember, we've done a 25% discount. And we've also done a longer term average. So we're not setting the rate based on today, we're setting it over a period of time. And so right now we have a rate that we start with at 2.44. So that's quite a bit lower than the current rate at 3.5. Then in addition to that, we apply the percentage that Lindsay's folks come up with, which in a lot of cases is 80 to 70% of that rate. So the rates for these loans are very, very low. And it's a very good opportunity for folks out there.
So it nets out to like what, 2 and change, something like that? Less than 2?
Less than 2. We have them as you go through, you'll see it's less. I think they're all less.
All right,
than
so
2.
but I want to get this out on the record, right? So what we're saying is, no, the money's not 0%,
It's pretty free to
but
borrow.
it is less than 2% in an environment where 3.5% would be what you'd get if you had the
True.
best credit rating possible, which is not what a lot of these folks would have. And I'm going to guess that, I mean, we could just make like, what do you just guess, right? Like an equivalent rate would be 5, 6.
I don't want to speculate on that. It's
All
gonna
right,
be high.
fine.
But it's
I'll
gonna-
speculate. It'd be really expensive. It'd be a lot more than, so I mean, I think the point's worth making, right? That less than 2% is a darn good deal.
And even having access, there's an access question here. Do they have access to a capital market that'll
Yeah.
give them a loan? I think that's more of a,
First place, right.
right.
some great discussion.
And I really appreciate where the committee's going here. I appreciate the work that the staff has done. But the fact is, unfortunately, there are some communities out there without some of this, call it whatever you want, things that really need to be done for the health and welfare of that community would not be done without some of the criteria that we put in this. And yes, I want it to be sustainable, but I also want those communities that without this, they can do something for them. It's sort of like, you know, it might not make a difference to the population of the starfish if a young man throws a starfish back in the sea, but to that starfish, it makes a difference. So anyway, my two bits.
Well said.
Yes, sir.
Well, Mr. Chairman, as someone who has actually done that in an attempt, a futile probably attempt to save starfish, and then it came right back. A couple of things. One is, that's the question, Richard. It's like, how do we find that threshold if we're going to try to encourage more loans and grants? And I agree. I mean, Denise, you said it so well in terms of the loan numbers are so low, especially with the 70 to 80%. But I mean, is that a staff question? Can staff come back with some idea of how to approach this so that those starfish have a chance? Or some way to ratchet down on the grants based upon capacity to repay, or I don't know, but I feel like we're all saying what we know we need to say, but I don't know how to do it. And I'm not qualified, I'm a board member, right? I don't know how, but it feels like we need some recommendations on how could we dial it back a little bit. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And then the naive part of me that does throw starfish back in the ocean would like to ask, I mean, is there any chance our legislature would recognize, I know we're in continuing ongoing budget challenges, but we're looking out into the future. Do we have any hope that we would have additional funding for this really valuable program? I guess I'm looking at you, Chelsea. I mean, I'm sensing you're saying, no, we're maintaining the status quo right now, but.
Yeah, I think right now, right, I would say if we're looking at a 2-year outlook, probably not, especially when the board has also tasked us with going out and finding more conservation resources.
Yeah, I understand that.
However, longer term than that, and if we're looking kind of post February 2026, I wouldn't rule it out.
Yeah, and as Mr. Chairman says, as we get this up and running and we show again that, and if we can figure out a way to do that dance where we have maintaining a revolving fund, but yet taking care of the ones that really need it or some group, maybe we can look at new bar charts from Denise with some recommendations that we can look at. So that's all I wanted to add. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think I heard a task in there, so I will take it. Yes, we're happy to come back with some recommendations. It's certainly a staff's recommendation to balance what Buchanan talked about, is that need to put the program to work, show successes in order to make the case at the legislature. So to balance that with maybe some long-term tweaks, what we would recommend is to process these applications in front of you based off of the current rules that exist. And then we will come back in a follow-on meeting with some recommendations. And those may be based off of, again, going through the due diligence we've seen here. I think, Richard, I think there is capacity, even among some of these borrowers, to put a little bit more skin in the game in order to preserve that help for those communities that we wouldn't be able to help but for that loan. So I think we'd like to not pause the program. We'd like to continue what you have in front of you, but then bring back some minor modifications or updates to the program to make sure that we have the resources in the future for those needing communities.
So,
Mr. Kim.
I think that the whole point of making sure that we do make wise decisions on that is so that in the instances where it truly is necessary and unavoidable to, get that out. But like if we are indiscriminate and then we'll actually reduce our ability to spend the money in the wisest way possible. The other thing that comes to mind is, and again, I haven't gotten into the minutia of the application process, right? But, I mean, some of this is just fundamental financial analysis, right? Like debt service coverage ratios and things like that, right? I mean, like these are like finance 101. And so it's not that hard. It's how much is your interest payment and can you pay it? And how does that stack up against, like, how much you earned last year or how much you earned the last 5 years? I don't know what the state of the financials are and how analyzable or how audited they are in those sense. But I mean, I imagine that we asked them for something. And so maybe just a quick sort of overview of ability to pay against those things. And then that would just, like, very quickly show the amounts.
And those do exist. So those are included as attached. They're included as attachments to due diligence, which is in the supplemental book. So they may be a little bit buried in terms of what we've done. But for every applicant in front of us, we have those sort of basic financial metrics, debt service.
And as you imagine, like, we are not quite as in the numbers
For
as,
sure,
right?
yeah.
So maybe we can just like bubble those up a little bit so they're front and center.
Really great discussion. Any more questions for staff on this? We'll try not to read too much into the metaphor of that starfish coming back. All right, we'll move on to agenda item 6. We'll move into our regular agenda items. And this is the recommend for approval of financial assistance on the town of Camp Verde. Scott, lead the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The town of Camp Verde's well replacement project includes replacing an inoperative well with a new and larger well and incorporating the necessary arsenic treatment. Additionally, the electrical infrastructure will be modernized to provide the power necessary for the well's operation, including a backup generator that can offer power for continuous functionality during outages. The project addresses critical water supply issues of the Guinea and Verde River Estates water systems, which provide approximately 2,100 connections. The town has been proactive and recently approved a multi-year rate increase to help financially support this and other planned drinking projects. Based on current analysis, they are projected to meet all loan coverage requirements. The total project cost is nearly $6 million, and the town is requesting $3.6 million from the Water Supply Development Fund, with the balance funded by congressional direct spending and local funding. Water Supply Development Revolving Fund financial assistance applications can be awarded up to $5 million in assistance per project, with up to $2 million in grant funding. The town received a financial assistance index score of 75, indicating it is a priority community and eligibility for the full grant amount of $2 million. The remaining portion of the request would be funded with a $1.6 million loan at 1.83%, with payments beginning after 3 years and then amortized over the next 20 years to maturity. And we do have representatives from the town here with us today, and staff is proposing the Water Supply Development Fund Committee recommend approval of resolution 2025-024. Thanks.
Does the committee have any questions for staff on this application? So it's part grant, part loan, and yeah, any questions?
We do have the applicant here with us in person as well, Mr. Chair.
All right, do we have any questions for the applicant while they're here? Do we have any requests from the public to speak on this item?
We do not.
All right. If there are no other questions or discussion points, can we have a motion? Any motions on
Doesn't feel like people are ready.
we can, if the applicant's here, maybe we can have them come up and hear a few words from them about the project.
So we'll just invite you up to the podium. Just click the little round button on the microphone so the light turns green, and then it'll be yours to speak.
Just state your name for the record.
I'm Jeff Lowe, Utilities Director for Town of Camp Verde. As you may or may not be aware, the town bought the private water company in 2022. The private water company knew that they were going to be purchased. So we've had about 20 years of lack of improvements to that water system. So any help you can provide for funding for our water system would be appreciated.
Questions for the applicant? You say it's been 20 years since any sort of upgrades on the system.
Approximately 20 years, correct.
Yeah.
And we have 3 wells at our main well site. One well doesn't function. It's drilled at an angle, was high in arsenic. So we don't utilize that well. The goal with this project was to abandon what we call well number 1, drill a new well to replace that well. And then as we've pumped over time, we've determined that arsenic's crept up. We're at about 12 to 13 parts per million now. So we combine all those into one project to fix our water system.
Great, that's helpful. Seems like these are the type projects the Water Supply Development Fund was set up for to help fund. Questions from the committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
so I can't vote on this. I'm going to abstain. I'm not conflicted, but I do work with Camp Verde in my capacity with Yavapai Apache Nation. But if I could, I'd like to comment on the efforts of this community to work to supply the water that they need for their community. When they took over this water system, they also serve and provide backup service to the Yavapai Apache Nation. When they took over the system, it was, and it is needing a lot of help. But the fact that they have taken it over and placed it in their municipal area is a huge benefit to this community. So, you know, when you think of water supply development grants and lending, this is one of those projects. So that's all
Yeah, I really
that.
appreciate that.
I truly appreciate the efforts of this community to do what they're doing.
Yeah, that's great. Other comments?
I'm just doing the math. 3.6, yes. And targets are 60-40, right?
I'll turn that on for you.
60-40 is the target. Well, 60% on grant, or sorry, on a loan would be 2.16. And a grant on that would be the balance about, you know, what about 1.5, something like that. Could you guys afford it if we did it that way?
I'll ask our financial director.
And I don't know how else to put it, right? But we're supposed to go 60-40. We're gonna give you 40-60 or whatever. And so now I'm just trying to figure out like if we can do it the other way.
Yeah, Mike Showers, Finance Director for the town of Camp Verde. Not to draw this out too long, but just to honestly say, WIFA has been an amazing support for us over the years, and we've really learned what a benefit that is. We have utilized a lot of loans, we've utilized a lot of forgivable principal, and we're actually just now kind of dipping into the grant arena. This is one of probably 4 or 5 projects that are going to be coming your way the next couple months. We definitely have a lot going on, wastewater and water. To highlight again, we are looking at like a $5.6 million project here. And we've got the other $2 million coming in from another grant source. But I also understand that doesn't really impact the funds that you have and how you're dispersing them. So all of that said, the grant money that we can get from WIFA is amazing and just enables us to continue projects forward. Could we flip that around to the amount that Pete Kim had suggested? Yes, we can do that. That's a lot for me to say, But I think it's worth saying that the benefits that we've gotten from WIFA and the things that we know that we ask for, that would be an amazing benefit to our town. And I don't feel like I'm walking away from the table really losing much with what we're looking at.
Yeah. I really appreciate those comments. I'm just doing some quick math up here. And again, like, if we flip this, 2.16 becomes 1.6, or like 1.6 becomes 2, that's a delta of 560,000 at 1.83%. Right? That's an extra like $10,000 in interest a year. It's not that much. Right. So I don't want to get every single one of these to kind of go through that stuff, right? But at the end of the day, if we're sitting here and I just feel like we isolated and pointed out Denise pointed out a really, really, really important kind of thing, right? And so, and if we're gonna do this right, then doing the numbers like this, it doesn't seem, and we just asked directly, right? And why do I think that if we hadn't had this conversation, we would have just approved it? So, yeah, thank you for that honesty, and thank you for just being a good person around it, just kind of, because it could have been easy for you to say, nope, couldn't afford it. But I, for one, appreciate that. That's my comments.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions?
So, Mr. Chair, if we did do the 60-40 where it was, 1.5, you say, Pete, and 21.
It'll be 2.16.
If we just switch that and then and that would be my motion.
I wanted to make a recommendation in terms of just doing math in public here.
Okay.
We are, rather than read out a specific number, if you tell us what you want, which is, for example, if the motion was to approve this, but with a 60% loan, 40% grant, let us do the math and we will bring to the board all that rather than doing the math in public. But if you give us that overall guidance, that's how I think of our preferred motion would be.
And
If you were gonna go down that.
And let
if
me
you were
ask
gonna go down that
staff,
path, I
if,
just-
let me ask staff before there is a motion, if there were a motion, problematic in any way. To do that, okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I just want to say that would be the way to do it if we were going to do that. The only thing that concerns me, and I'm just speaking, I don't know if I know the answer to this, is are we going to do math on every one of these applicants?
Yeah. Right.
And if we are, we're going to come up with some number and say, well, that probably shouldn't be a problem for them. But for some communities, that might be a problem for them because it's coming out of the next bucket of money they need. I don't want to contradict what I said earlier. It's like trying to find that balance is really, really tough. But for some small communities, that means that, these are small communities with limited incoming revenue, limited revenue overall. So I just don't know if, are we gonna do that math on every applicant? And if we are, does that work in this setting right now? I don't know the answer to that. I'm just putting it out there. Although I appreciate that anybody can do math on the fly like that because that's why I went to law school. So I don't have to do that.
I'd like to hear from staff, right, regarding what you guys think is the right move here. I think you've understood what we're trying to do, and 60-40 kind of would seem to be. I don't want to go and do math in public or subject people to watch me doing math in public, right? And nobody wants to see that. On the other hand, it's our job to try and do the right thing here. So that's what I'm trying to do.
For the first three applicants, there's already a loan grant split component. The town of Camp Verde was able to answer that question on their feet in the meeting. I'm not sure that I would count on the other 10 applicants being able to replicate that, particularly the applicants who are here today with the draft language showing 100% grant. I'm not sure that you'll get a full, can you do it? We have some opinions in terms of what the debt service coverage is, but whether their ability to actually implement those rates that would be necessary to hit that debt service coverage is maybe a answer that you're not prepared to do real time. But to your specific questions on Camp Verde, could we do that? We could, between now and the board meeting, make that change. Would we recommend doing that on the fly for the other applicants today? I don't think we want to put the applicants in that answering on the fly question.
Okay. Joe Satelli, General Counsel, just for your awareness on what your authority is, it's really broad, just like a lot of the authority for the committee, right, is ARS 49-1208, the Water Supply Development Committee will review applications for financial assistance and make recommendations to the board regarding those applications for assistance. Board adopted policy 1.6 also mirrors that language. So in terms of what you can do with your recommendations, it is broad. You can direct staff to work with the applicants to move towards a ratio. You could set thresholds. You've got really the wide tool belt that you can use here. So
Going back to
Very helpful, thank you.
going back to our earlier discussion, it feels like for some of us, there was some value in the early comers, the people who were first to come up and talk, and especially those first to come up and be willing to be part of a loan program. If I'm, I guess, given my preference, I would prefer to accept it under the conditions are, noting that we are trying to get to that 60-40 split as we move forward. But that's, I guess, putting down my preference. Other preferences, yes.
Yeah, and I'd say the same thing. And, you know, I think it's a wonderful idea to make sure that we're sustaining as we move forward. But if that direction, and I wasn't here, if that direction wasn't really provided, I'm not sure that it's appropriate right now, even if they happen to be here, to put them in the position of saying, can you do this financially? And I know we have a lot of very small municipalities and towns that I think it could put them at a great disadvantage to put them here today and ask them if they can do this. I don't think that's the way to proceed.
Mr.
Cook.
Chairman, yeah, if I could
Yes,
just add one
Denise.
real quickly. One thing I just want the committee to understand is we evaluated this based on the policies that committee has set in place prior to this meeting, kind of piggybacking on what Mr. Cook said. Maybe the decision should be more about that versus the actual applications today being presented.
Mr. Cook.
Yeah, I'm torn between those two concepts here. Is that all of these remaining number 9 through number 16 agenda items 9 through 16 submitted applications. They knew what the policy and procedure were, or at least that information was available to them. That if most folks, I think, that did that would have a reasonable expectation of what the outcome would be as far as a recommendation. Even understanding that this committee and the board has a prerogative to do something else, including not approve it at all, which we don't want to do, and I'm not suggesting that. So at one end of the spectrum is I agree it's not fair or appropriate to ask, and I really appreciate the conversation that we were able to have with the town of Camp Verde and your honesty and forthrightness in that discussion. But it's not possible today, nor fair or appropriate to go through every one of these, even if we had all day to do it, and ask on the spot how much you could afford by way of a loan. At the other end is expediency, which is just saying, let's just go through and approve all these as submitted. We could have a conversation about whether or not we want to do this all at once, rather than go through them one at a time and be done in 10 minutes. There is some middle ground, and it takes time. And not necessarily to have a conversation with every applicant, but that's possible too. But to have an estimate from the staff, and we talked about this, based on attachment C to each one of these due diligence reports, it says what is the estimate of the staff of how much of a loan up to 60% of the amount requested that this applicant could afford with their estimated net revenue after existing debt service would be. And that's a number, and it's a starting point rather than just a complete blank slate and say, well, how much debt can you afford? That's a difficult conversation to have. It would be better to have at least a straw man of, well, we think applicant number 412, that out of your $2 million request, you cannot, in our opinion, undertake a 60% loan, but you can undertake a 20% loan. And in my opinion, I'll just put it out there, every one of these applicants except 2 can afford to take some amount of a loan. It's not the same for everyone, but it's more than 0. So that would be my preference is, let's take another bite at this apple. And at least have that information at our fingertips.
I concur.
Just getting started on this program, another month is not gonna have a dire outcome if we use that up for important work.
Good. I like it.
And when you say another bite at the apple, another bite at the policy, the overall policy.
No, I think we have, now that you asked the question, Mr. Chair, I think that we need to have another conversation about modifying the policy. But I think another bite at the apple as far as these 12 or however many that there are applications, not number 6, 7, or 8, because I think those are pretty clear cut. But the rest of them, to have another bite at that apple with this additional information from our staff. And I would go so far as to say, not just calculate a number, but come back to us with a debt amount and a debt percentage that you think, and it's an up to number.
If I may.
We expect 1.2 coverage, and there's, like I said, all but 2 of them can do that. How much more than that can they do? Well, that's something that we're asking the staff. What's that range? And what would the maximum loan that would be possible as a starting point for discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
would that require a change in the policy, or would that just require, are you saying we table these now and come back once we have that analysis? I'm just trying to, I don't have an opinion, I'm just trying to understand.
I don't know what the formal mechanism is, if it's tabling or not, but if tabling means don't take these up this time, ask the staff to go and do some additional analysis and bring them back again. If that's tabling, then that's what we're talking about. And it doesn't mean necessarily, this is my answer to Chairman Davis's question just a minute ago, doesn't mean changing the policy right now, because the question is change it to what? And that's more of a deeper conversation, but we can, and right now there's only a few of these, there's 10 or some number like that, 8 or 9, that we can go individually and have the staff go individually and look through and say, what would be an appropriate loan amount for these applicants to undertake? And as a committee and the board, we can waive, it's our policy, we can waive it and do something different than what the policy says if we have good reason to do so.
And I imagine part of that would be having conversations with the applicants and letting them put a position out there, whether they can do it or not, not just based off our analysis.
Right. I would not suggest that we surprise them and say, well, wait till the next meeting and we'll let you know what we think is right for you.
Mr. Kim, did you have a?
Oftentimes it's my role to just ask the uncomfortable questions, and I'll continue to do so. I really like the way that this is going. At the end of the day, I do think that the folks that need the money should get the money, right? What I'm trying to do is to avoid giving people too much. And because all that does is diminish our ability to help those who truly need it later. And so if we can take a moment, right, 4 weeks or whatever it is, to kind of study that a little bit more deeply, I for one would feel much better about it.
If I may.
Mr. Podolak.
So we could think on the loan team, it's a relatively straightforward calculation to say how much of the requested ask, up to 60%, could be covered while remaining below, while still maintaining a 1.2 debt service coverage. That's just a mathematical thing, and we could, I think, in relatively quick order, modify the due diligence reports to include that. It's the next level then to go back to the applicant and say, you know, politically, are you willing to, we think the financial metrics show this, are you willing to do that? I think if you're gonna send it back, we'd like some clarity on, do you want us just to do the math and present that, or do you want us then to send it back to ask that body then to come back with debt authorization up to that amount, or ask those questions? I think that's, before we go back and have those, you may find some that say no. And so then I think it's important for us to know, what are we telling them? Are we offering them, you have to take some debt, in which case they need to withdraw if they don't want to come to back this committee, or are you just asking for more financial information?
I think that's the exact questions.
And there are a few ways to answer that. And I agree with what Mr. Lunt said just a moment ago about not wanting to surprise an applicant in the December 18th meeting and say, here's what we've determined that you can take a loan of 42%, because of all the reasons that we've heard today. Well, what plans do they have for that cash flow other than paying debt service to WIFA? So we would like to know those type of things. So we don't want to do that. I think we could have a brief conversation with each one of the applicants. Again, there's only a handful, and it's not that staff doesn't have any other work to do. So there's some additional work to do, but pretty quick conversation, and there's 2 or 3 choices. The answer could be, we are not prepared to take any debt, notwithstanding your calculations, with or without a reason, in which case we withdraw. Or we want to let our application stand as is for 100% grant, and take a chance that the committee and or the board will decline to fund it. There could be something in the middle that would say, we're not prepared to respond to the staff's estimate at this point in time, but when we are, we will let you know. So that would be continued from meeting to meeting until the applicant is ready with an answer, which would be either no or yes, or some counter proposal, somewhere in between. And I think that's what I would offer them if I was in Denise's shoes, would be exactly that. Here's what we've calculated. What do you think about that? We can either proceed with the 100% request and see how that gets voted upon by the committee, or you can accept our recommendation from staff, our estimate from the staff, or you can come back either right now or at a future date with a counter proposal.
Maybe Lindsay can talk a little bit about, so there are essentially 3 categories. We've looked at the financial need and all the project benefits, the statutory criteria, and we've come up with a score, an index. And the more generous the score, the more favorable the financial assistance terms are. And I think that, so that's a concept that the board and committee endorsed. I want to be careful, Ted, I understand what you're saying, but if we go too far down that path, we start to make the financial assistance balance decisions solely based off of ability to pay. So I'm thinking about, how do you balance that ability to pay with all the other, because you get points for certain things. Can you walk through kind of the real high level, Lindsay, of how does this index, right? So County Camp Verde has a financial assistance. So what are the kind of things that was considered to get that 75%? Lindsay.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have, it's the financial assistance index score, which, as Director Prolek noted, for Camp Verde, it's 75%. But to get there, they have their scoring within their PPL largely based on some water demand points, which, are your wells going dry? Are you in a basin that has declining groundwater levels? different criteria to meet some water demand points. They have project benefit points, so we're giving projects that are doing recharge, that are doing conservation, that are extending services to unserved populations. Those types of projects are going to get more project benefit points. And then we have other categories. One that is heavily weighted in the scoring criteria is going to be their financial need points, and that is based on their median household income. So I think that is something that we saw a really robust response from areas where they had low MHIs that were going to qualify them for that 100% grant within the scoring criteria. That's definitely what we saw within the current application list right now. But there's other categories as well. There's feasibility, and then I'm sure I'm forgetting one. But so there's multiple categories that we're looking at, but largely weighted on their household income. And I think what I'm hearing is we could continue on with that scoring and the recommendations, but possibly in the due diligence, have a stronger arguments for, or stronger data to show what the level of debt that the system could take on. Yeah, thank you. I think I got them all. Yeah, feasibility, project benefit. Like I know I'm forgetting, but we have the different, and what we've been referring to them internally is the different tiers. The tier 1 is anyone with that 70 to 75% index scores. Those are going to be ones low MHIs with high project benefits, high water demand points that are really scoring into that blue category there and eligible for that 100% grant. But like you see with Camp Verde's project, they are eligible for 100% grant, but their project cost exceeded that $2 million, which is why they requested 3.6, and that additional fund would be provided as the loan funds. And then we have the 80% index scores, which would be the 40 to 60% kind of ideal that we would have. And then we have 85 to 95% index, which is the tier 3, which they would just be eligible for the loan funds, not grant funds at all. We do have several of those on our list, although it's only 2 or 3, I think, in the tier 3.
So I think we could go down the path, provide the information that Ted asked for, but I just do want to make sure that we're doing that conscious of this, and that the ability to take on debt doesn't swallow the policy choices that are sort of accounted for in this chart.
Mr. Kim. Yeah, I've definitely got comments on this. So like, I understand that this is the financial assistance index. Hearing it again, right, kind of gives me a moment of pause, right? Because what is this thing telling me? If a project is feasible, then their financial assistance index goes up, right? So that means that if it's a feasible project, we're more likely to give them money. If it's less feasible, we're more likely to give them a loan. I mean, you can kind of see where I'm going there, right? It doesn't seem like it kind of passes the sniff test for me in terms of like, or water demands. It's kind of like, okay, I definitely need water. Maybe I've got the richest community on the planet, but I need water. And so therefore I'm more qualified to get a loan, or sorry, a grant because of that. It's just like those kind of things are, to me, right? Financial need, right, is obviously determinant of deserving of financial assistance or not, right? Maybe we can throw in some other stuff around the benefits because we want to like kind of put our finger on the scale and say, yes, we want you to like be good conservatives of water or whatever. But some of these other things, it's just like, as I want to think about it and wrestle with it a little bit more, right? But as I was trying to just kind of create a sentence in my head is, if this, then that, and we should give you more money. I'm not getting there.
But we got to remember that a lot of these communities, they might be in a situation where they might have the ability to take on some debt, but if they were going to do that, they'd fix roads or some other project. And so water is super important. Water supply is super important, but it may not be as important as the most immediate needed right in front of them. And so I think this actually does make sense in that context, because there are communities that with really high needs, but they need that incentive, or they might need a grant. They might need some free money to be able to work on those projects, if that makes sense. It's just.
And if I may, I absolutely understand what you were saying. I love the idea of having some form of sustainability. I have a real problem with the people that were applying based on a policy that's different than what we're now enunciating. And I don't have any problem with moving forward prospectively and making a change in policy, but I have a real problem to apply this retroactively when these people in good faith have gone ahead and applied based on the policies that they know we had. And I'm assuming that when they filed these applications, they did so looking at their own finances.
Yeah, and this committee made a very conscious decision that we wanted to get some money out the door to get this program started with the eventual ideal that we would get closer to that 60-40. I think that's the direction the committee took as far as the last meeting, is that we recognize this was a pretty darn good deal, or even maybe better than a darn good deal, but that was on purpose. That there was reason behind that, and so I think it's worth remembering that.
Mr. Chair, you know, and putting this matrix up has been good, and talking to these communities as staff does when the applicants. I sort of like Patrice, I don't want to create a moving target, and that's sort of what we're doing here. And so you know, if we believe in the matrix, we want this money to go to work. We've expressed that prior, and now all of a sudden, and I appreciate Camp Verde for being beautifully, being honest here. And, they shouldn't have to say that in a public meeting to me. And yet I admire, because they were honest. But there again, we had a set of criteria. It went through the matrix. Staff came up using our criteria that we established, and they came up with a decision. Now, either we support it, or we just tank it and start all over again. And I don't think that's fair to those that have applied under the matrix that we have now. And so I think a lot of things have been considered. And there is water, without water, we all die, but they have other needs too, that they need to use their money, and sometimes other things have to suffer because this is the most urgent need. And so I don't know, I think we need to go ahead and move on this with the criteria that we have established previously. And if we don't like the criteria, then let's change it the next round. But right now, I tend to agree with Patricia and others that we okayed these criteria, and the applicants did it. So it seems like we're spinning tires here. I say I make a motion that we approve this as staff has recommended, as presented, and you can either vote it down or do whatever the committee feels.
Patrice Horstman, I'll second it.
There is a motion and a second. More discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I just would prefer a roll call vote because on this one I should have.
Sure. Okay. And Joe, our committee rules, do we have to have, what's the vote threshold? Just a majority?
Yeah, simple majority for the recommendation. By statute, the board would require 6-vote majority, but at the committee level, you're simply making a recommendation. You're not authorizing the financial assistance, so simple majority is sufficient here.
Still
To the board. Yeah. We have a motion and a second. No further discussion. We'll call for a roll call vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a reminder, the motion is on the floor to approve the application as recommended on the slide. Mr. Cook,
Aye.
Ms. Horstman,
Aye.
Mr. Kim,
Nay.
Mr. Lyons,
Nay.
Mr. Lent,
Aye.
Ms. Montgomery,
Abstain.
and Chairman Davis.
I explain my vote. I'm voting aye for reasons that Mr. Lunt described, but I do think there's an opportunity for us to implement something just as Mr. Cook was describing on future applications. I think that that's a good direction to go, the right direction to go. But given that these are in front of us, I vote aye in favor of moving this project forward.
Mr. Chairman, the count is 4 yes, 2 no, 1 abstain.
Mr. Chairman, can
Yes.
we go back to that criteria bubble box that we had on that last slide? You had it up that had the criteria. So moving, I mean, I agree with what we're doing here right now, and I think we should move forward on the ones that are before us today and consider each of them. But is it possible that we could, the discussion should be about the points that are ascribed to each of those categories for moving forward? I mean, is that if we change the financial index score for something, I'm just asking, say you take financial need, that's 100 and you moved it to 130 and you took project benefits and you moved to 100. I mean, would that, I'm just throwing things out there. Would that change how we look at these applications in terms of grant versus loan?
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly look at changing the scoring. I think our recommendation would be to determine, if we wanted to change the scoring, I would say we would need to close the applications from accepting any more and continue, because the ones that have submitted, they have all of this information. We would try to be very transparent in our application process so they could evaluate this and
The 48
determine,
applications.
I think I'm gonna get these points and what kind of deal. So I would find it hard to do it with the current application, the 48 applications we have right now. But if there was a desire to stop accepting applications, reevaluate the points. I do also want to make sure that it's clear with the point system. So there's the overall priority value points, which determines their ranks. But to determine the index score, it's going to be the financial need points. There, if you can, on the slide here, they have to have at least 50 financial need points to get into that tier 1, regardless of what their other project benefits or water demand points. So it is largely still going to be weighted on that MHI for the communities. Anyone who gets 0 financial need points, the more well-off communities, they could still get some grant dollars, but they're never going to be recommended for 100% grant dollars. So I think there could be some tweaking to those levels, but I just want to make sure it's clear that to get 50 financial need points is somewhat difficult. We looked very in depth at the data in the census website, looking at everything that we could to figure out where those cutoffs should be. And that might be something that we want to tweak in the future. But it is a difficult kind of line to meet already. So it's something.
Yeah,
to
Mr.
consider.
Chairman, I don't want to open up a can of worms. I'm just trying to figure out, what we do, but I recognize that we have 48 applications for 93 million already pending right now. So thank you.
Mr. Prolaz.
So if we are going to take committee input on this, rather than have the committee debate, should that be 100 or 105 or 98? We prefer to take that feedback in a big picture. So are you okay with the fact that there are categories of people who get 100% loan? Or should the most generous category be 95% grant, 5% loan? So give us those concepts. Are you okay with 100%? Do you want financial need weighted heavier? And do you want ability to pay? We have MHI, which we think of ability to pay through the political decision of making rates. We do not have ability to make debt service coverage ratios factored into this. If you want us to consider way more heavily or consider debt service coverage ability in this, that kind of feedback, if you want us to not have a 100% grant option for the most generous scoring, let us know that. And then we will come back to you with a new sort of matrix that takes into account those high-level guidance. Mr. Cook, or we can take this discussion and try and tease that out and come back to you with a revised version for, say, a next round.
Mr. Chair, committee members, I think that if we have a category, recognizing that our target is the 60-40 loan grant split, and we have a category for no grant at all, we ought to have a category at the other end for no loan at all. The real, but it needs to be skinnier than this. The real, I don't know if that's going to work. But the real issue at hand here is how do you do that? And I don't think that this committee has the wherewithal or the time to sit here and do that. And staff may have to go through some different what ifs. But we do have a good population so far of applications. That is 2/3 of the funding that we have available to use as a basis for modeling. So I guess my short answer would be, no, I don't think that we have to force everyone to take some amount of loan, even if it's 1%, just as a symbolic type of thing. That there are going to be some applicants that can't afford to take a loan and would get nothing at all if that was the criterion. So it's up to the staff, I think, to figure out how to do that.
There's a little bit of, I think, SRF example that we can fall back on as well. The 60-40 is an aggregate in the same way that forgivable principal is an aggregate. There's not a forgivable principal amount that every SRF borrower gets, but what we have in every EPA grant is a maximum amount of that grant that we can give out as forgivable principal. That gets doled out to some borrowers more generously than others. But at a point where there is no more forgivable principal left in our bucket, you cannot give out anything other than 100% forgivable loan. 60-40 is an aggregate. I think you can still process these. If we get later into next spring, you may choose to sort of act like we have no more forgivable principal. Say, I know you have this matrix, but I'm uncomfortable giving out any more 100% grants at this point in our funding cycle. It's a little bit of a first come, first serve, but there's a little bit of a temporal component to that. But
What's the-
Denise's numbers sort of are not on a loan by loan basis, but it's on an aggregate of the entire portfolio.
What's the best way for the committee to give that direction to staff? Is it putting, as part of the agenda items of kind of the fun updates, just sort of talk through that?
I think so. I think if at Denise's update, you feel that you're in a position where you're not comfortable giving out any more 100%.
The reason I
grants
ask is that
until
it
we
feels
have
like
more
there are
money.
some members of the committee that we might be there ready to tweak, but maybe some uncomfortableness about doing that on these applicants today. So I guess that's a way of saying maybe we continue that conversation in the next meeting beforehand but keep that in mind as we continue to get applications in.
I think if you choose to continue to process applications right now, we owe you some options.
Yeah.
Not on individual, but as a separate agenda item at the next committee meeting. And those could be, we can work with each of you individually and we can go back and revisit this conversation to develop those options, but we will bring you options for how to further strike this balance.
Mr. Cook.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question of staff? So this is specifically to Lindsay. So do we have for these 48, now understanding that 3 were approved earlier, we've got 11 before us today. so there's 34 left or something like that. Do we have for those remaining that 34, if that number is right, have they all completed their secondary application?
No, not all of them, but a large number have.
Okay.
And
So in my mind, at least, there are a few dividing lines that we have here. We got all the 48 well, there's even no dividing line at all, which is just, come on, make your applications and we'll just keep on going using this until we decide to change this, if we ever do. Or there's some subset of the 48, which could be all of the 48, except for those who have not yet, they've only submitted their PPL application. So that's why they're on the list, but they haven't submitted their other application. Those we could say, stop, we're gonna put you on hold for now because we're considering modifying the program. Or it could be just these 11 and everybody else now has to wait until we have this other conversation. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase my next statement here, because it sounds like explaining my vote on the last one retroactively. But if we are going to proceed with, I'm not asking anybody to vote ahead of time or give an indication what your vote may be. If we're going to proceed with number 9 through 16, just as is, based on these procedures and so forth, I was not willing to subject this one honest party that's here to do something that the rest of them are not going to be forced to do.
They should.
That was why I voted aye on that one. But we still have a chance here to do what we discussed earlier, which is can we at least have some additional data before we vote on 9 through 16? But I see that it seems that the tide has turned and or may have turned, and we no longer are asking the staff to do that. I'd like to clarify that.
Go ahead, Mr. Kim.
I'd like to make a motion that we table these until such time as we can get a little bit more detail on these things. I realize that that may throw a wrench in things, but I, for one, am swayed by the notion of, yes, I understand that we had a process before, but I don't want to propagate an error if that was indeed the case before. I'm so inspired by the person who got up there and just said the truth, for God's sake. I mean, at the end of the day, it feels like this is a laws and sausage moment, right? It's messy. It is, and I get it. But, and I commend every single person that's speaking today. We're all just trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so to me, it seems like the right thing would be to take a moment to pause. Let's check this. Let's go back and check to make sure that the numbers are right on these. It's 4 weeks. It's not the end of the world. I would like to move that we table these and then just try and come back with the things that Mr. Cook suggested.
Do we have a motion and a second? Any discussion on the motion?
Just clarifying on the motion, Camp Verde has passed and they have been
Right.
approved. So it would be
Yeah.
for the remainder of this
Right.
agenda.
The remainder of the agenda, although I will note in passing that if Camp Verde were to come back and maybe reapply under like different auspices, I would be very favorably inclined.
They won't.
It's done.
All right. Yes, Mr. Clerk.
So just a suggestion to the maker of the motion that I just seconded to consider a modification to that motion to proceed on numbers 7 and 8, which is a 60-40 split based on their 80% ranking. Because that's pretty clear cut. My opinion is there's nothing more to be gained from trying to fine tune those anymore. And it would just be 9 through 16 really that would be tabled for the next time to have, and just to clarify the information that we're seeking for the next time is, number one, what we discussed earlier as far as affordability, for want of a better word, and number two, staff's thoughts on potential modification to this framework here.
I will so modify and stipulate.
Okay, second.
So clarification for the staff, go back, add some metrics as far as affordability, and then also a staff opinion on whether the applicants could or would or should take on a debt. Is that right? Mr. Cook?
I think it's a combination of what we discussed earlier, where I had in my earlier comments separated an overhaul of this procedure as a separate thing from the more expedient evaluation of 9 through 6 of agenda items 9 through 16 individually, with a recommendation from staff about the loan affordability from our perspective, from the staff's perspective. But now I think we're asking for both of those things.
Yeah. In my idea or my thoughts, but I really like that idea. I would prefer to do it moving forward after these 11 that are on the agenda, but that would be a separate motion, and but part of the discussion of this motion, I guess I would throw that out there. But we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Would you restate the? Yeah, this is Joseph Tully, General Counsel. There were sort of two motions in there. One, I think, was to proceed through item 7A. A second was to postpone agenda items 9 through 16.
There's been a
So I
revised
recommend
motion.
restating that, and it would suggest that if you plan to proceed to 7 and 8, you could simply make the motion on 9 through 16 and then just return to those agenda items. They don't have to be two motions to do that. You can just do the one for whatever items you're planning on postponing.
Yeah, 9 to 16. I'd like, this is Pete Kim. I would like to move that on agenda items 9 through 16. We table for now to provide an opportunity for staff to study and answer some of the questions that we have put forth. On items 7 and 8, which I had previously moved to also be tabled per Mr. Cook's recommendation. And once again, he shames me for being far more prepared on these things than I am, because he actually has commanded these numbers, and I commend him on that. On 7 and 8, based upon Mr. Cook's recommendation, I'd like to remove those. And I think we can just decide on those today. There's no need to wait on those. That is my motion.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, we'll have a roll call vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cook,
Aye.
Ms. Horstman,
I'd like to explain my vote. I am going to vote nay, and the reason is what I've stated earlier. I think these individuals in good faith applied. Quite frankly, I think that we've received a pretty thorough review from our staff as to why the recommendations were made. I think going forward beyond the what's before us today, 6 through 16, anything going forward, I think it could come back to the board and we could take a look at the criteria. But these people already applied based on the information presented. Sounds like you presented a lot of information. So mine is a no.
Mr. Kim,
Aye.
Mr. Lyons,
Aye.
Mr. Lyons.
Once again, I think these applicants, 6 through 16, they did with the criteria. And it seems to me like we're moving the target. And so for that reason, I vote nay.
Ms. Montgomery,
Explain my vote. I understand what some of the votes are in terms of nay, but these are the ones that are just before us are just the ones that have been elevated to this level. We have 48 applications that applied under that criteria. So I think we're trying to get this right. And I commend this whole committee for these discussions, which are not easy, but it's a tribute to this committee that we're trying to do the very best job we can to make this fund work. And for those reasons, I say aye.
And Chairman Davis.
Nay. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 ayes and 3 nays. The motion carries. So we will table 9 through 16. That still leaves agenda items 7 and 8 left. We'll move to agenda item 7. Do we have any, Scott, you can lead the discussion.
Thank you. So we are looking at the town of Chino Valley. This project involves the design of a new groundwater well, storage tank, booster station, and transmission main to help mitigate the impacts of PFAS contamination and provide a new source of water for the town. The design will be followed by construction of a new water production facility with a final estimated cost of $10.7 million. Once complete, the project will provide resiliency and capacity to provide PFAS-free water to the town's water system and sufficient capacity to provide water to private water companies within Chino Valleys if needed. Now, the town is requesting $2 million from WIFA to fund the design and engineering of the project. They received a financial assistance score of 80, which qualifies them as a priority community, and under WIFA's Water Supply Development Procedure 2.18.1 qualifies for financial assistance in the form of 60% loan and 40% grant. The town currently has 5 WIFA loans with maturities ranging from 2026 to 2037. These loans are all secured by a pledge of system revenue and excise taxes. Currently, system revenue is not sufficient on its own to meet the debt coverage requirements for a loan. However, the additional support of the excise tax pledge does allow them to exceed these WIFA requirements and also keeps the proposed loan pledge on parity with the current WIFA loans. The total financial assistance, again, is 1.2 million. 800,000 is grant, and it's actually 1.2 million in loan, 800,000 in grant to that 60-40 split. And the proposed loan will carry a 1.952 with no interest payments and principal payments for 3 years and then a 20-year amortization. I do have representatives for the applicant here, and staff proposes the Water Supply Development Committee recommend approval of resolution 2025-025. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions for staff or Scott, Mr. Connolly on this? Any questions for the applicant? Do we have the applicant even available? Yes. All right. Any questions for the applicant? Any requests from the public on this item?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Then I would entertain a motion if someone's ready.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Cook.
since Mr. Lunt is,
Walking
well,
in.
he's walking in, but he's too late. I move that the committee recommend to the board approval of financial assistance resolution 2025-025, Town of Chino Valley.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? With no further discussion, we'll call for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstained? The motion passes. Let's move to agenda item 8. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tucson Sanitary District faces critical challenges in providing reliable reclaimed water, which accounts for up to 55% of the town's total water use. The proposed project involves upgrades necessary to restore the operational capacity of the 250,000 gallon wastewater treatment system, which has been offline since August of 2020. These upgrades will restore Tucson's reclaimed water supply capacity, ensure reliable service for fire protection, irrigation, and other critical needs. The district is requesting roughly 4.4 million from WIFA to upgrade their wastewater treatment systems. They received a financial assistance score of 80, which qualifies them as a priority community, and under WIFA's Water Supply Development Procedures, qualifies them for financial assistance in the form of 60% loan and 40% grant. Tucson Sanitary District has no long-term debt over the last 4 years reviewed, but had positive revenue available for debt service in all years, with 3 of the 4 years over $100,000. And an unrestricted fund balance of around $746,000. With our projections show the district will qualify for a water supply development loan with the debt service coverage ratio between 1.05 times and 1.13 times once loan payments begin in 2028. Considering the history of no debt and the projected coverage under 1.2 times, the loan will require funding of a debt service reserve and repair replacement fund. On the proposed loan will carry a 1.952% interest with no payments and interest for 3 years and then a 20-year amortization to maturity. I do believe we also have representatives here to provide additional comments, and the staff does propose the Water Supply Development Committee recommend approval of resolution 2025-026. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Does the committee have any additional questions for staff? Any questions for the applicant? There's no additional discussion. We have a motion.
We
I'd like
do
to make
have,
a motion if I may.
Mr. Chair, we do have one request for public comment, but I believe it's from the applicant.
Okay.
So unless it's at your discretion.
Does anyone have questions for the applicant?
No.
Okay, we'll move forward.
If I may,
Yes.
Patrice Horseman, I'd
Please.
like to recommend approval of financial assistance resolution 2025-026 Tucson Sanitary District WSDs -041 2025 in the amount of $4,421,192 as set forth in the agenda.
This is Pete Kim, I second.
We've got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? No further discussion. We'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstained? The motion passes. All right. We'll move on to agenda item 17, call to the public.
Mr. Chair, we have one member of the public who is signed in to speak. That is Susan Guthrie, as she is with us virtually. Susan, I'm going to enable your mic. Once I do that, you'll need to unmute yourself, and then you will have a 3-minute period in which to provide your comments.
Okay, thank you to the committee for taking time to hear my comments. As you can see, my town was an applicant that was going to be considered today. Of course, I'm very disappointed that we didn't get an opportunity to speak to our application as we put in days and days of time to prep this application, given the current rules that were presented to us. So of course, I'm very disappointed. The one thing I would ask is that in your future considerations of how you're going to score these, that, us taking on a debt is not always the best thing in the best interest of our community. Sometimes it's getting other grants to offset the cost, or sometimes it's actually money that we're putting in. So I just want to be cautious about saying, hey, if we're not willing to take on a debt, then we're not going to get approved for funding, because there are other means. And if you look at our application, we were putting in a portion of our fund budget, as well as got another grant to offset the design costs. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration. Additionally, most of us that are communities have a water or wastewater master plan. And I know like us and Camp Verde both have $20 to $30 million worth of identified projects. And we are piecing together funding for all of those. And when we take on an additional debt on one project, that can affect our debt ratio, which then puts in jeopardy what we've established and what we're pursuing for another equally as important project. So you can't really look at one piece of the pie. You got to look at the whole pie. And I just ask for you to consider those items as you look back at the rules that you're establishing to evaluate these applications. So thank you for hearing my comments.
Really appreciate those comments. I want to assure you that certainly as we've tabled some of these, the committee, that's not the end of these applications, and staff will be in contact and we'll look for ways to move forward. But we really appreciate the perspective and you taking time to give us those comments.
Our next
Thank
member of the public signed up to speak, Mr. Chairman, is John Luther. And it looks like John is from Local First Arizona. John, I've enabled your mic. You'll have to unmute yourself. And then again, you will also have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the committee for their due diligence on all of these projects. I just wanted to advocate Local First through the Arizona Economic Resource Center. We support a number of small municipalities, oftentimes rural municipalities. And I do have to advocate for, and I think this will be interpreted as a moving of the goalpost for a lot of these communities that applied, as well as potentially somewhat of a lack of trust in the due diligence that was done rather thoroughly by WIFA employees for financial, legal, and water system compliance measures. I also wonder if the discussion on, again, after the fact, after I believe that the statutory requirements and the grant to loan requirements were very clearly communicated to all of these communities, whether or not that discussion of are you willing to take on loan may be kind of pressuring some of these communities, some of which may not have the means to realistically take on a loan in a way that would not otherwise bankrupt their system. I think that there were a number of communities that are likely confused, I would say disappointed, and some of them may be a little bit fearful after today's discussion. I'm not sure if any of them are maybe courageous enough to say that, because for a lot of them, the future of their water system and its reliability and its service to the public maybe hangs in the balance. I am in the position where I can kind of speak on their behalf and say that I think that this discussion was a bit confusing, and again, interpreted as moving the goalposts for a lot of these applicants who move forward with very clear direction, very clear guidelines, and a very thorough vetting throughout this process with both the application and the PFA. So I just wanted to voice that.
Great. I appreciate the comments. Do we have any others?
No, Mr. Chair.
Great. Moving on to agenda item 18.
And he was up to say something at the microphone.
Yes. Go ahead, Blake, we'll recognize you. 3 minutes.
Hey, first of all, Blake Anderson of Mogollon Water Management. I empathize deeply with the board's position. As a member of the Conservation Grant Fund Committee, we went through a very, very similar process. I will agree with last member of the public who spoke that for us having applications go forward, we deal specifically with the smallest of systems. And so from a financial perspective, I completely agree with your comments, Mr. Kim. This is cheap money, even if you're loaning it out. But for most of the districts that we're dealing with, they're very small and they're financially unsophisticated. It's a challenge for us to get them even to come and apply for funding in the first place, much less to invest the money to get preliminary engineering reports and develop the applications. And so there's a significant cost. Some of these districts may only bring in $50,000, $100,000 in a year of gross revenues. And so when they're taking that discretionary income and putting it towards preliminary engineering reports to develop these applications and bring it forward, and then the positions get moved after they've applied, it makes it really difficult for them. Maybe they would have different applications that would come forward at all. Secondly, just as somebody who sees what is going on in these small districts, I would recommend that the committee may consider encouraging best practices for financial capacity going forward. Are they using an asset management plan? Are their budgets built in with depreciation? Because what we see boots on the ground is most of these systems have expense-based budgets where they're just taking, this is how much it costs to operate this system, this is what it costs us to make repairs, and they're not looking at the total lifetime cost of the assets that they have in the ground. And so they've basically been subsidizing for decades what they're going to have to pay in the future, and now they're so far behind they can't get caught up. And so there's lots of dead fish or dead starfish, as you guys made the analogy to either. I mean, there hasn't been a system that we've helped with yet that we haven't seen that. And so those dead starfish are out there, you can toss them back in and that's great, but they're gonna keep swimming back unless you get them on a path to sustainability in the first place. And in the second place, they're not gonna come to the surface until there's a catastrophe and things actually start to fail because they're not gonna know what the basis is for what they're applying for. So once again, I empathize with the committee, been there, so kudos to you. Thanks.
Thank you for that. We have more public comment. Please state your name. 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mayor and group of the council. I'm from the town of Miami. Our item is number 11, and we're gonna be very short. In our case, we have a consent agenda from ADQ back to 2022. I take over in August 2022, the town in a difficult financial situation in operation, roads and wastewater. That's the reason for us, 100% grant is a lifesaver. We don't have the financial capacity like other jurisdictions to put any kind of 20%, 10% payment. We don't have it. Very realistic. And I want a consideration and the review of this list of individuals that we sent today. They're in the list today, but probably they are in the same boat like us. Financially, we don't have the capacity for take a loan because that's what we try to do, move forward as a town, but at the same time, eliminate those debts that was created by previous administration. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments. Just a reminder to state your name for the record.
I'm Jack Miller. I'm with Q Mountain Vista in Quartzsite. We came here today. We was contacted by WIFA and was told that you had money to loan or grant. Grant was what we was going for. We did our part till late last night. We were still doing our part. We get here and I feel like we got in a football game. In the middle of a football game, someone changed the rules. And I don't understand why you had one motion that said to go through with it. And then there's another motion that counteracted that. I don't quite get it. But anyway, it is what it is. I just want you to know that we're putting $50,000 of our own money out of our HOA water fund to the 1.2 million. We've only got 240 people to pay this loan, and we're working on a 35-year-old water line system. Part of it has been done, half of it's been done, which we're still paying on that. But I don't know. I kind of feel like I got kicked in the gut here, and we did our part, and then we get here and the rules change. So that's all I got to say.
Appreciate the comments, and I'll just a broad statement is the due diligence that has been done is not negated. That will continue to stand. I think staff has some direction to maybe add some additional due diligence. But many of you, we hope to see you again. We will see you again at future meetings. It's not the end. We'll continue to consider these projects. Any other public comment? Agenda item 19, our next meeting. Chuck?
Put on the agenda, it's TBD, it's still TBD. It said nothing was denied today. So our intent is to take agenda items 6, 7, and 8 that were recommended for approval by the board to the board in December. Our intent is to bring back agenda items 9 through 16, which are all tabled, so they're all active and alive, to a next meeting of this committee. We'll circle up as a staff and figure out the timeline to come back. It's my preference that we don't wait until January to come back and bring you guys updates. We'll work on scheduling that. So we'll get with y'all on availability. We'll look for rooms and we'll look for how quickly we can provide the recommendations and things you guys have asked.
Yes, first, Patrice.
Yeah, and thank you. And I appreciate we're going to have another meeting on this and I look forward to that. But I want to thank the people that came here today for the agenda items that were listed. I know it's very difficult. I happen to live in a place outside of Phoenix and it's very difficult sometimes to be able to get down here and get your staff down here. So for those that didn't make the travel here, I want to thank you so much and look forward to having this on the next agenda and getting this concluded. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lunt.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, our next WIFA board meeting, I don't think we have a committee meeting scheduled for that afternoon. It would help if maybe we could schedule this committee meeting for that afternoon of the next WIFA board meeting, which I think is what, on the 18th. And that would be my suggestion.
Yeah. Chuck, I think the suggestion, Richard, let me work the schedules offline. If it's possible to, I think that's a possibility. If we can get our work done before that, I would like to also move the program along faster than
Yeah.
that. So I would like to be processing applications. So if we need to have another meeting to consider policy and then potentially do a December meeting to process applications, I hope to see it before then.
Okay. Yes, my preference would be to, as soon as possible, as soon as staff's ready for that discussion, so we can move these applications forward. So really appreciate that discussion. Any other on that, on next meeting? I'll just say you guys didn't make it easy on me today, so I appreciate it. No, my kids know me. I have this little whiteboard in my house where I put dad-isms. I call them dad-isms, and one of them that regularly shows up is embrace the tension. And what I mean by that is this was a really good discussion today. Pete, you brought that up. A bit messy, tension, but in that I think we're going to get in a better spot. So I appreciate all the work. Doesn't mean we always had to agree on the way forward, but I think overall we're still trying to figure out this program and we're getting into a good spot. And I hope we don't discourage the applicants too much, because we will move forward and we will move forward on your applications. So with that, we will stand adjourned.